Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Sharon Woods, the Director of the Hosting and Compute Center at the Defense Information Systems Agency. Sharon, thank you so much for being with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me.
And so you're doing a lot of important work at DISA these days, but the Hosting and Compute Center is a relatively new organization after DISA did some reorganizing last year. And I'd love if you could just start by kind of explaining what is the center and how is it organized and what's its mission?
Absolutely. So yeah, as of October 1st, the DISA underwent a reorganization. So Lieutenant General Skinner took a look at the organization and saw some opportunities for mission realignment and unity. And so as of October 1st, the Hosting and Compute Center is now one of 4 centers in DISA. So there are 3 others, and together collectively, we comprise the DISA mission set, if you will. So the Hosting and Compute Center specifically is responsible for all hosting and compute platforms at the enterprise level. So that includes data centers, it includes on-prem cloud, as well as commercial cloud. And really our vision is to become the warfighter's provider of choice for hosting and compute. And so that's what we are setting out to do. And you'll hear the word unified a lot, but that's really what we're looking to do, because we don't want these things operating in silo. Part of being the provider of choice is how do we orchestrate these things in a way so that behavior is more hybrid and able to provide customers with optionality.
Right. I think the conversation in recent years and past years has been kind of around getting away from data centers, going to the cloud, and not really talking about those things necessarily together. So it seems like this might be a new opportunity to think about how they actually work in concert as part of a future IT state at the Defense Department.
Exactly. You know, when we took a step back, and this is where I think the unification of mission under the reorganization really made a difference, because it took the different platforms across data center, on-prem cloud, and commercial cloud, it put them under one roof. And as we really started to collaborate, it became pretty obvious, especially as we've interacted with our customer base, that, you know, this idea that it's binary, that you're either in data center or you're in commercial cloud, and that somehow you're supposed to take everything in the data centers and move it to commercial cloud. It's really, I think, misleading, because that's not how people, you know, that's not how mission owners operate. That's not even how industry operates, right? That, you know, folks have a different footprint in data center. Maybe they have some on-prem cloud capability. Maybe they have some commercial capability. And while, you know, you may be making different choices around, hey, this workload, our technology roadmap is that we want to put it in X, Y, or Z environment, there's going to be persistent requirements based on your particular requirements on which platform makes the most sense. And the reality is that all mission owners, I mean, in the government and in the private sector, we're all in different places in our migration pathway to where we want our landing zone to be, so to speak. And so, you know, as the provider of choice for the Department of Defense around hosting and compute, I'm not trying to force mission partners in any one direction, right? My job is to provide optionality so that they can come to us as a one-stop shop, but I'm not looking to make them a one-size-fits-all, so that we provide the options and then they can assess, and we can certainly help what's the best way to meet their requirements.
Got it. But of course, cloud adoption is really at the center of DISA's plan, as the new strategic plan puts it, to drive force readiness through innovation and, you know, transform traditional hosting capabilities and deliver streamlined alternatives. How do you kind of take that big goal at the center and operationalize it?
Sure. So I will mention briefly, right, the joint warfighting cloud capability. So I think that that's a really important dimension. You have to have the underlying foundation in order to get to the commercial cloud, the sort of the utility piece of it, if you will. And so, you know, JEDI Cloud, the single vendor approach, that was sunset, so to speak, and we came out with a multi-vendor acquisition strategy. And so recently, 4 different direct solicitations were issued to Microsoft, Oracle, Google, and Amazon. So right now they're in the process of, the government's in the process of evaluating those proposals. But separate from the evaluation process, I mean, fundamentally, the department needs rapid access to the infrastructure platform and software as a service layer when it comes to commercial cloud, but not just on classified, right? This is what makes, sort of JWCC unique, is that it's also targeting those unfulfilled capability gaps that the department, our mission, really drives. So all classification levels out to the tactical edge, where a unit, right, operators may be completely disconnected from any kind of communication pathway, just completely isolated. But there is a persistent need to collect data, do things with that data, and then hopefully at some point they reconnect. But those are really unique requirements. And so we have different enterprise vehicles. I think JWCC provides that super highway to get at those requirements, especially. And so JWCC is that foundation, but that's just one piece of it, right? So there's kind of cloud accelerators on top of that, because you can kind of give mission partners access to cloud, but we're still learning how to consume cloud. And so the hosting and compute center, part of what we're trying to do to be the warfighter's provider of choice, it means we need to make it consumable. So not just give you kind of cloud in a commoditized way, but also give you things that help you get into cloud, particularly the things that have to be repeated over and over and over again just to make the basic cloud environment work.
Right. And so really quickly on the JWCC, you recently issued those 4 solicitations. When do you expect we might hear more about that, if you can say?
At this point, all I can say is in the coming months. I wish I could be more specific than that. But at this point, that's we're not going to comment any more specifically at this time.
Understood. And you mentioned those cloud accelerators. What are those? What are you looking to do on top of these big enterprise offerings?
Yeah, so we've already done some things, right? I don't think anybody in the Department of Defense has been sitting back on their heels while we were waiting, whether it's for Jedi Cloud or JWCC, right? Everyone has moved out. The mission can't wait. And so one of the things that we have put in place is what we call DoD Infrastructure Is Code. And infrastructure as code is not a concept unique to DoD, right? That's a very modern way of tackling how do you stand up cloud environments quickly. So what we did is enter into, they're called CRADAs, but different agreements with multiple cloud vendors so that we could work with them to leverage at the platform layer. How do we put together these baselines so that essentially a mission partner, a mission owner can come in, and a little bit of an oversimplification, but push a button and it stands up in an automated way, the basic environment in the cloud with identity, as well as basic security policies. That's a huge deal. And on top of that, we have gone through the effort of getting them pre-accredited. And we're talking about over 100 common controls. So that's a really substantial chunk of what mission partners now, they don't have to do that again. They can leverage that and then only worry about the delta. But when you talk about speed, and this is why, Accelerator, in this case, it really is about speed. You're taking something that we've seen take, 30, 40 weeks to put together, especially if you have a dev environment, a test environment, production environment. In the absence of infrastructure as code, people are sort of stuck with manually setting up each of these environments, and then you introduce human error. Maybe the dev environment wasn't set up, in a way that really mirrors what was happening in production. And so with infrastructure as code, in about 2 hours, you can stand up these environments, and as many of them, as you need, and they're pre-configured, they're pre-accredited, and that's a huge advantage for mission partners. So I would say that's one of the efforts that I would highlight as being something we were already tackling, again, with multiple vendors, multiple cloud vendors, so that's in place, right? So when JWCC is operational, there's a mechanism to use those. And they exist now for whatever cloud vehicles mission partners have. And we have had, well over a dozen pilots with different users of using those today, including in production environments.
Yeah, it sounds similar to perhaps what the Air Force has done with Platform One, where they've put together these packages to allow organizations to more quickly, develop software because they don't have to go through all of those accreditation and security processes, right?
Absolutely. And I think this is too, especially DISA as an enterprise provider, it's really important that we have partnerships with the different DoD entities that are already working in this space, right? So we're looking at optionality and we're also tackling best of breed. So I think when it comes to Cloud One, we've worked with them, for a long time now. And so we've learned a lot from them. I think we took slightly different technology choices on how to create these infrastructure as code environments. But I think that having the options for all of them is important. And then for us to work together so that it is, at least there's some collaboration. It's not happening where we're completely ignorant of what one and the other is doing. So we talk with them regularly and just kind of understanding where they are and then sharing with them where we are.
And is that sort of how the center plays this perhaps coordinating role across the department more broadly, is by collaborating with the other services who, as you mentioned, haven't been sitting still as the JEDI procurement kind of dragged on and they needed to go out and get their own cloud capabilities. So are you kind of playing that coordinator role at this point? And how does that work?
Sure, that's a great question. So not in a formalized sense, right? Not as an official, sort of DoD governance board, but, each of the services, right, their equities are service specific, which makes complete sense. But, as a combat support agency where we are an enterprise, DISA is an enterprise IT provider. And then within that, the HAC is responsible for hosting and compute. Our equities are everybody. And not just the military services, but also the DoD components, like the combatant commands, like some of the, what we'll call fourth estate elements, whether it's, DLA or DCMA, you can sort of list out, and OSD, right? So even just sort of the E-ring, if you will, they're kind of outside of that military service specific construct. And so, I think, again, for us to be a provider of choice, sometimes that means recommending that people go somewhere else. But I want them to come to us because they trust that we're going to be honest brokers. And I think the better we understand the requirements, the more we can really build out the portfolio so that is responsive to what they need. And especially when you think about kind of current world events, it is critical that we are able to be agile and reactive to what is actually happening, not just kind of putting something out there and waiting and see if it takes. That's not a viable approach. And so that's definitely our business model. And it really is a business model. And that's one of the things we're really focusing on in partnerships, coordination, all of that is key. You can't just operate as an island. And that's part of what modern hosting and compute lets you do, right? It creates this unified global fabric if you deploy it in kind of a smart way.
Got it. And so the DoD Infrastructure as Code, I think you may have several pilot projects in place already leveraging that. Can you give us any examples of where you maybe are seeing some progress?
Sure. So we had a really great experience early on. So I think it was also just really exciting because it was one of the earlier pilots, but with the Army Corps of Engineers, we worked with them. And so that was actually, I think, sort of approximately 38 weeks is what they were experiencing. And because it was one of the earlier pilots, we didn't necessarily know, hey, is this really going to be repeatable? What's going to happen? And so frankly, I think we were as excited as they were when we saw that this is a 2-hour turn. This is unreal. And then they can take all that time and reinvest it in the mission. And that, I think that's where, again, our role is to, the hack is to look at what is that, repeatable, kind of commoditized, the pieces that, folks have to do in order to get to the interesting part, right? In order to get to the mission specific part. And so that's really the market space that we're going after, is trying to remove that burden. And yeah, that experience with the Army Corps of Engineers was really incredible.
Got it. And so where does it go from here? You said you had several creatives in place. Does this start to scale at this point, or where do you go?
Yeah, so I think right now, now that the hack has been created, we're looking at really packaging those and moving past pilots and really getting into a place where this is provided as a service, something that is consumable just by ordering it, right? Where it really is a capability that's available now. But I think there's a few different directions that we can take this. And again, this is where it's really important to talk to mission partners, because we could take it a million different directions. And I don't want to just randomly pick something. I want to pick something that's going to be actually valuable. So I think one of those things is continuing to diversify the different cloud vendors where these are in place, right? We have 2 now, we're looking to expand it to 3. I'd like to see that grow. But of course, it takes time. Each one of them kind of orchestrate their platform layer a little bit differently, but certainly that's a thing. It's just a matter of working through it. But beyond that, there's different baselines that you can have. And so we've started off with a few pieces, but you can build in even more. And as the cloud providers add more and more and more at the platform layer, where even like AI, machine learning, right now, that's even, you can get that as a packaged thing at the platform layer. That just opens up possibilities of how can we pre-configure and pre-accredit these things where, it is a best value offering for mission partners, something that is a priority for them.
Got it. Okay. And when we were talking earlier, I think you mentioned that after the strategic plan came out, the hack started working on its own kind of action plan. I guess, can you talk a little bit about what's in there and what folks should look out for?
Yeah, and we just released that. So hot off the press. And so taking a step back, right, the DISA director, Lieutenant General Skinner, released very recently the overarching DISA strategic plan for fiscal year 22 through 24. And from a hack perspective, we wanted to very clearly communicate to both industry as well as our mission partners what they can expect from the hack and where we need help, right? I mean, especially towards industry, we cannot do this alone. So we've released our action plan. And so the strategic plan is the bigger piece of this. Our action plan is nested underneath it. So there are 5 lines of effort that General Skinner laid out in the strategic plan. And so we've aligned our 10 strategic goals to those 5 lines of effort. So you can really see how they kind of stem from one another. And so we're going to push it out. It'll be on our website. We'll kind of push it out through different medium and definitely talk about it at different events, because it's really important that our mission partners and industry see that, because those are just the strategic goals, right? We need to dive deeper than that and really unpack what that means. And some of them, like Infrastructure as Code and Cloud Accelerators, we're already kind of moving along a pathway. But then others, I think that we're starting a little bit at the beginning of the path. And so I think there's a lot of possibilities about what does that mean.
And could you give us a sense of what are some of those challenges that you might be going to industry and asking them for more help on?
So I think definitely one of them, and it's not that there aren't any capabilities, but I think this is where it's not operating as a unified global fabric, is OCONUS Cloud. And so I think there's, of course, you sort of start where you can, right? If you're doing agile and minimum viable product, you don't start with the most complicated problem set, but we are definitely in a place where we need to take, commercial cloud, the data centers, which, we do have 5 data centers overseas, as well as on-prem cloud, and look at how do we orchestrate those things together in a way that makes sense. And when it comes to OCONUS Cloud, geographic location becomes really important, and also prioritization of, where the combatant command's positioned and which ones are the most, I'll say, challenged geographically. You think about Indo-PACOM, and that's just spread out across so many different islands. But then you also think about AFRICOM, where comms are really limited. And so that's a different kind of complication. You think about EUCOM, and I think there, while it may be more connected, When you think about it within the context of current events, having these multiple layers of resiliency so that if one form of communication goes down, there are others, different platforms that you can use are in place. So I think each of the combatant commands, when you look at their geographic area of responsibility, the problem set is different. And this is where our communication with the customers, in this case, the combatant commands, as well as the sponsoring military service, it's just critical. We can't guess and throw something out there. And I think, again, that's why the action plan is so important, because we're trying to communicate where we're focusing, and hopefully that kind of provides a jumping off point for us to have those conversations.
And that gets to what we talked about early in our conversation, kind of extending cloud down to the tactical edge, right? Is, you need to worry about where you're putting these different capabilities outside of the United States. And that seems like one area where that's somewhat of a DoD unique problem, as opposed to where you can kind of hitch your wagon to where the commercial market is going a little bit more.
Yeah, it's blended. And I think this is part of where we need to really partner with our cloud vendors to make sure that we understand the totality of the different capabilities, because we have different data center locations, for example, in the commercial transport, right? All the cabling, there's different areas where there's kind of points of presence where multiple transport layers kind of converge, in particular, cities, locations, and that provides, right? That's an opportunity to connect into the commercial fabric. And so, how much capability is there? Whether we can use commercial encryption, for instance, to protect more sensitive data, not just unclassified data, where those locations are relative to where the data centers are, and then where is the joint force, where are they looking at investing and moving? So I think there's a lot of different factors, and those aren't even all of them to triangulate. But again, I suspect, right, that commercial vendors are further along and have a wider variety of capabilities than we may appreciate. And that's part of what JWCC, partnering with those cloud vendors, as well as the rest of industry that has expertise in this area, because we haven't even talked about, right, like satellite as a service. The market space has fundamentally changed in the way that things are communicating in their commercial services and commercial products. So we can't just do this kind of military specific. It's commercial technology. We need to understand how to harness it and use it, understanding where we operate.
Okay. Well, I wanted to shift gears a little bit and ask about a decision DISA announced late last year, which was to let the MilCloud 2.0 contract expire in June. Can you just kind of describe what went into that decision, and where do the users, I think, are primarily in the fourth estate, where do they go from here?
Yeah, so, again, one of the things that General Skinner did, not just the reorg, right, but really do a full-blown agency-wide strategic program assessment, right, or a zero-based review, sort of whatever you want to call it, but fundamentally looking at all of our portfolios, all of our programs to assess, what is the requirement now? Why are we developing something or deploying something this way? And does it make sense from a cost standpoint, whether it's meeting the requirement, not just but now going forward? Is this something we should continue doing? Is there a better way to do it? All of these questions that really need to ask. And so one of the areas that was assessed is, how are we meeting the on-prem cloud requirements? Why are we where we are, and where do we need to be going? And so, we made a determination that the best value way ahead, so to speak, was to pivot from a specific contract, right, from the MilCloud 2 contract, and look at deploying a different on-prem cloud capability that leveraged our collective experience, what we've learned over the last few years, as well as how do we capitalize on our infrastructure. And so we did, it's operational now at both NIPR and SIPR. We call it Stratus. It is an on-prem cloud offering. And so, right now for folks that are in the MilCloud 2 environment, we're partnering with them very closely to help them get to their target environment. Right now, we're target agnostic. So if they need a persistent on-prem cloud environment, then Stratus is available to them. And we're definitely all hands on deck, regardless of where the target environment is, making sure that we're supporting all of our mission partners so that they can move to a different environment once the contract expires in June.
Got it. And so this Stratus capability, can you tell us a little bit more about how this came together? You said it was kind of based on lessons learned, and it operates both in the NIPR and SIPR net, which I'm sure is a big deal for some organizations. So how did that come together?
Yeah, so we looked at leveraging some existing work that we had done in on-prem cloud, really more just kind of consuming that as a basic, as a base. But some of the lessons learned, especially as the department has been consuming more and more commercial cloud, on-prem cloud is really supposed to mirror as many capabilities as possible and characteristics as commercial cloud. Obviously it's not able to replicate. I mean, the scale is just so, it's just different, right? It's unavoidably different. But when you look at things like elasticity, when you look at automation, when you look at self-service and sort of consume as you go, right? Utility-based billing, these are all attributes that people expect in commercial cloud. So we consumed kind of a basic foundation that we had at both NIPR and SIPR, but then we've been working, and we've already added sort of additional capabilities and have a roadmap to keep adding more and more of how do you make it function and mirror more of what's happening in commercial cloud. But there's an infinite number of things you could do. And so I know I keep saying this, but it's a fundamental premise of Agile methodology is to work with your customer, right? Your end user, your mission partner, whatever you want to call it, but the person who needs the thing, working with them so that you are prioritizing what they need and rolling that out in a way that is timely to what they need.
Okay. And so I think the MilCloud 2.0 contract expires in June. And you said you were target agnostic. Did you mean on sort of the date for when folks have to get off of that, or how will that work in the coming months here?
Sure. So some folks, I think, sometimes on-prem cloud is more like a way station. It's more like an interim point where folks are on a journey. They intended to get to commercial cloud, but the application they have wasn't developed cloud native, right? And complete lift and shift sometimes can be the absolute worst thing you can do. And it ends up being more expensive in commercial cloud than it was in your legacy environment. So I think with on-prem cloud, Stratus is an option for folks that need to be in that environment for one reason or the other. But others were really close to moving to commercial cloud, or actually their roadmap already had that. And what this has done is accelerated it. So some people are moving to commercial cloud in addition to on-prem cloud.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, and you mentioned that lift and shift issue. And I wonder, even though you're the hosting and compute provider, to what extent do you consult with organizations about how they make these different transitions in the most optimal way possible? Or do you have to bring in, perhaps other subject matter experts from DISA to help them with that? Because there's just so many layers to the technology stack you have to take into account.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely not shy about talking to different SMEs across the department. Again, those partnerships and keeping track with what others are doing is so important. But because we have operated for a while now in all of the different hosting and compute platforms, that really positions us to be able to explain what things can and cannot do. Right. And we want to provide real things, true best value things. If I want to be the best, provider of choice, that's what the hack is setting out to do, which is what we're doing. Then we need to be honest brokers, and we need to understand the different things that we're actually offering. So especially when JWCC comes online, I mean, we will have a very viable superhighway pathway to commercial cloud. But that's just one, right? We have the traditional data centers, which we are actually continuing to modernize so that more and more those actually start operating in a more automated way and in a more elastic way. I mean, the technology is converging a little bit. and really needs to be thought of as a spectrum, not sort of this one or the other thing. So we don't necessarily, right, we're not architecting their applications for them. I mean, that's something that is outside the scope of our mission. But what we can do is help advise the mission partners on, hey, these are the different things you get in these different environments. And maybe even more importantly, these are the limitations. So if this is relevant to you, that may change where you think you want to go.
Got it. Yeah, and you mentioned the data center modernization issue, and over at the Department of Homeland Security, they call it a hybrid cloud environment, where they still have one of their big data centers running, and they're trying to optimize the workloads between that and the commercial cloud. How is DoD approaching that data center modernization and kind of integrating that with these emerging cloud environments?
So yeah, we have actually, and we're at the place now of piloting it with our first customer. But we're always focused, right? We're really, and this is part of, again, how you be relevant and responsive, truly internalizing agile methodologies. And so, we're not trying to boil the ocean. We're defining a scope, a relevant capability, and micro successes, delivering in less than 6 months, and so if that's impossible, then it needs to be sort of rescoped that you can truly do it. So one of the things that we took on almost right away from the reorganization that happened in October 1st is what we're calling container as a service. So everyone knows containers, right? Kubernetes, pick your favorite. And those operate in all the cloud environments. And so that's, those things are recognized as best practices. What may not be as readily known is that containers can operate in data centers. And so for people that have a significant data center presence, what container as a service allows them to do, and in this case, our pilot is web server containers using OpenShift technology. And so it's a simple thing, rather than having to configure and stand up each individual server every single time you need a web front end. We have it as a container. It's hardened, it's automated, it pushes out. But this is where, maybe that agency's end game is to get to commercial cloud, but you have to recognize that they're not there right now. But that doesn't mean they can't consume and take advantage of something very modern like a container. So we do have it operating. It is operational in the data center now. We are piloting it with our first customer. And once we've really proven that out, we'll transition it to being a full-blown available production capability. And so I think that those are some of the micro successes and many steps that we can offer of how do you almost commoditize hybrid cloud, if you will, right? So it's again, those things that are kind of rinse and repeat. Let's remove that burden from customers so that they can focus on their mission specific needs.
Got it. Yeah, and I think it's probably a reminder that data centers aren't totally a thing of the past, and certainly not within the Defense Department at this point. Another thing I wanted to just give you a chance to actually respond to is in the strategy was this issue about system integrators, which I think has generated some discussion. The strategy makes reference to essentially streamlining through things like JWCC, the different cloud environments, and potentially eliminating the need for third-party resellers, integrators to achieve efficiencies. And is DISA's plan to totally cast away with the system integrators at this point, or what? Can you just expand on what that line might mean a little bit more in practice?
Yeah, so DISA is absolutely dependent on our third-party integrators, as is the rest of the department. We need the expertise. We don't have enough people and enough sort of organic talent internally, right? And frankly, we're not DISA's mission is enterprise IT, but the broader department, its mission is national defense. And so we have to have people that are experienced and experts in this area. So I think it really depends on what you're buying. We do billions of dollars of business, as does the rest of the department. with systems integrators. In the case of JWCC, which is really all that the strategic plan was talking about, we kind of followed in the footsteps of the intelligence community, and they showed some of the benefits of contracting directly with the cloud vendor, but it is for very specific things, right? That infrastructure platform, kind of the commodity utility piece of it. And so JWCC is a contract, or will be, 4 contracts, hopefully with directly with the cloud vendors. But that's just having the cloud. Then the next one, well, what do I do with the cloud? So even though I'm offering things like infrastructure as code, that doesn't mean that the mission partner has the internal expertise to actually know how to deploy it. Even though it's not difficult, if you're just unfamiliar with cloud technology, it's pretty overwhelming. And so I think mission partners, frankly, in my mind, the market potential for systems integrators is going to broaden, because more and more mission partners in the department are going to be able to consume cloud, almost at will. And when we get into more complex spaces like OCONUS Cloud or Tactical Edge, right, these pieces that go sort of beyond and start getting into national defense specific needs, I think, again, that's where our systems integrators have a lot of history and knowledge in that area. And then also in terms of resellers, we definitely use resellers. The hack uses resellers, that's important. It's just that in this specific case, for these specific contracts, a different acquisition strategy was chosen. But that's just, those contracts, that's it. It doesn't change the fundamental strategy for the rest of the department.
Got it. So it's just identifying kind of one area where there might be a possibility or potential for some streamlining and efficiencies, as the document put it, but doesn't apply to cross DISA, and certainly not across the Defense Department.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay. All right. And so I also wanted to talk about, you talked about expertise and how obviously DISA doesn't have sort of the sole area of expertise for cloud, but I was wondering how you're approaching kind of your own workforce, how you're thinking about training them and perhaps reskilling them to meet some of the goals that we've discussed today.
Yeah, I think I would say every entity encounters the challenge of how do you have a unified workforce that is learning how to operate in more and more modern technologies, but doing it in a cohesive way, given other technologies, right? So in the hack, we have, traditional data centers, which we've operated for a long time, although we are modernizing those. And then we have commercial cloud and on-prem cloud. And so I think, one, because these things have operated in silo historically, the teams are not necessarily unified. They haven't necessarily worked together, very closely. And so one thing that the hack is doing, we really push cross-functional teams. And that's actually really consistent with the way you would do an agile product development, right? Where you have a product owner, you have kind of a technical expert, you have somebody that's representing the user community, you have an architect, right? You have these different elements where it's cross-disciplinary. And so that's actually container as a service is a really good example of where that happened, where we had a cadre of data center personnel, but then we pulled some of our commercial cloud SMEs and injected them into the team, really as consultants. But in that 6-month journey of developing from cradle to grave the container as a service project, it was the data center team, and they are taking containers and putting, so that's just a small example. But the idea is, don't let hierarchy get in the way of a modern unified workforce, from the highest levels, right? At the SES level down, we need to be encouraging and giving opportunities for cross-functional teams. And one of the elements of our action plan, because of course it goes beyond, individual efforts, right? That doesn't necessarily scale to everybody. So one of our strategic goals is identifying a senior training champion, someone that is going to take a look at, and it doesn't have to be, again, the idea is don't let grade and rank kind of interfere with things. So it'll be someone that's passionate about it, someone that's good at working with other people, where to start with, we just need to understand what training we actually have, and not just the kind of the typical training. But then there's a whole bunch of free training that the cloud providers and others offer. So once we've kind of understood and triaged the portfolio, we can start coming up with different plans and guidance on, hey, if you want to do this, these are the kinds of things you need to do. If you want to do this, and we also hire interns, we do summer hires. These are all different ways of trying to, modernize the workforce. But the idea here is having not a data center workforce, not a cloud workforce, but again, a hybrid workforce in a sense. And so, we call that technician of the future. Now, I'm not looking for one or the other. I'm looking for people that maybe their expertise isn't equal across all of the platforms, but it's not completely alien to them. So a technician of the future. And so training is really important. And that gives people an opportunity to work closer and closer together. So just like the technology is kind of a spectrum and hybrid, where the hack is really working hard, and it's part of our strategic goals and the action plan to do the same thing with the workforce.
Yeah, and there was actually a mandate several NDAAs ago for DoD to use cross-functional teams across different programs, and I guess this is a good instantiation of that. But so it sounds like there's two parts to this. There's kind of bringing people together who perhaps haven't really worked together before to solve problems, but then also bringing in some additional training for folks to actually bring new education to people. Maybe if you're a data center expert, but you're not really sure, you don't have a lot of training on the cloud and how commercial cloud works, you could take some training there. Am I getting that essentially right?
Yeah, those are, I would say, two key factors that we're focusing on now. There's other cultural elements to this, and I'll just mention it briefly. But things like, from my perspective, right, my philosophy, and it's certainly not just mine, but you have to create the conditions for innovation. You have to get people excited, and then you have to create a safe place where this spontaneous creativity happens. And one of the most important facets of that is the idea that the best idea prevails, not the idea from the person with the highest rank or the longest tenure. When you pull these teams together, they are, equals in terms of rank. The idea is, let's bounce around ideas. Let's get on a whiteboard. Let's get excited about what we're doing, and don't let some of the traditional trappings hold us back, right? I mean, in the technology space, that's critical. And so that's one of our cultural values, is really trying to push that. And we saw it even in the development of our action plan, right? It wasn't just something that the senior leadership baked up off to the side. We had, well over 100 people of all grades across the world, right, pulling from all of our data centers. We had an IPT, they put together a recommendation. Our leadership looked at it, internally to the hack, and we just kind of kept iterating on it, just like you would with any kind of agile, product. And so, I mean, that's kind of a real world example of what it means for the best idea to prevail, rather than the most senior people in the organization dictating our strategic goals.
Sure. I mean, that's a tough cultural thing for any organization to overcome, I think, let alone a military organization that is traditionally very hierarchical. So that's kudos to you guys, and hopefully that can continue. And so, as we kind of come close to time, I just wanted to ask, we've talked a lot about barriers to how you're tackling different barriers to cloud adoption and enterprise IT already, but are there any other, specific issues that you're trying to tackle now that you're director of this new hack?
Yeah, so, there's always the barriers of funding and acquisition. That's a real challenge. And I will say, we don't necessarily have specific plans right now. I think working with the folks that really have the expertise, but the 2-year budget cycle and the funding for that's a really big deal, actually, because the technology with Agile, right, even our strategic pivot from MilCloud 2 to Stratus, that's happening real time in the year of execution, as we like to call it. Well, that year of execution funding was set up and approved 2 years ago. And so, it clearly wasn't done understanding the current conditions. And then you look at what's happening with current events today, and we have to surge to respond to how do we provide IT so that we can support the military and diplomats and others in the best way. Again, we're doing that in the year of execution. So I know people, much higher ranked than me and OSD and Congress and others have tackled that. But I will say that actually is one of our biggest barriers. And in the beginning, we spend almost as much time talking about the funding piece of it and how to make that work than the technology piece of it.
Right, and there's new commission that's tackling that issue, and we'll certainly all be paying close attention to. But we really appreciate you taking the time today to talk to us about the center and all the things you have going on, and we'll look forward to tracking that more in the future.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
I'd like to thank today's guest, Sharon Woods, the Director of the Hosting and Compute Center at the Defense Information Systems Agency. Now let me send you back to the studio for more on the DoD Cloud Exchange.